Good evening, my name is Tony Jones, and you're tuned in to the Coalition online at coalitionradio.us. Here on the Coalition, we discuss all sides of local, regional, and national news, politics, and current events. I insist on saying news like Paul Harvey on the show for some reason. News! And I didn't even have any of those special cookies this week, but let's get on with the program. Christine is here. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, Tony.
The P.O. taxpayer is here. P.O., good evening.
Hey now.
We were just enjoying ourselves as we got on the air because with this magical form of new media, we can do a thing called website analytics. And through these analytics, I have found out today that someone has been Googling P.O. taxpayer, but also someone has been Googling Tony Jones R.I. naked.
So how do you feel about that, Tony?
It's officially gone too far.
I think it proves you're a star now. You're a media star.
That is just disturbing / disgusting.
No comment.
That's coming from me.
What was the term Kevlar or salad oil used in any of those searches?
As long as they're not Googling Tony Jones R.I. naked hello Clarice. I think I'll be okay. But we got a big show tonight, P.O., and we also have a lot going on over at coalitionradio.us. Not only can you get our podcast there, but you can check out the blog, and you can check out a link to P.O.'s piece at golocalprov.com. So there's a lot going on over there, P.O.
We do, and we've been fortunate enough to bring on board a couple of new bloggers, some folks who have been guests on the show and people who are about to be guests. Greg Garrett has posted a couple of pieces on, analyzing some Providence Journal writings, and he's also been focusing on some video, what I call video nature poetry blogs. Some great stuff coming out of the Green Party. Robert Mallon, who's also been with us for a few weeks, has posted another piece, an environmental call to action. What's interesting, and I'm going to put a shout out there, we've had a lot of success bringing people in from the left of center, if you will, to write on our blog, to post video blogs for us. Interestingly enough, the libertarian / conservative community has been a little reticent about putting pen to paper. So, in general, if you'd like to write something to us, go to coalitionradio.us, send it up to us. If we publish it, we promise we do not edit. We do not put our own spin on it. It's right out there, raw, for you to disclose your inner beliefs. If you're conservative, we need you. If you're libertarian, we need you even more. So you take the opportunity, put something to pen, and bring it to our attention. We'd like to put it up there.
Yeah, otherwise we're not really reflecting all sides of issues.
Yeah, for a show that started out as a libertarian with one Green Party member, we're being accused by other members of the alternative media of having swung to the far left over the last few weeks.
Well, my people are representing here.
Well, we're gonna correct that in a few minutes. Severely, we're going to terminate that prejudice instantly. But Tony, the coalitionradio.us site is becoming really a hub for all sorts of, I think, thought, poetry, expression, music, and you've also got your blog and your website up, RI Free Radio. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
RI Free Radio going strong. Shows throughout the day, and then when there's no shows, local music actually plays. So rifreeradio.org, there's news content, huge hits going on, building momentum for RI Free Radio. So another alternative media outlet that is not swayed by any kind of advertising. The only thing it's swayed by is like my lack of free time, really. Sometimes that sways the content because I'm a little tight on time and I don't have time to get everything up that I want to. But you mentioned an all call for bloggers and content submitters. We can also promote that through RI Free Radio, through TonyJones.org, through the Rhode Island Patch Network. So we can really... P.O. and I, off the air, like to call it pimping. So for lack of a better term, and hopefully for our daughters isn't listening, we will pimp out your content should you submit to us.
Wicked hard. We've got sites that we belong to all over the country, and they range from literally, hardcore libertarian sites a couple of Republican sites that we like to make fun of, except they don't get it, as well as any one of the left of center advocacy groups. It could be the Sierra Club, the Green Party, local Green Party. We're trying to make the reach nationwide because, as I like to say, Mr. Gobeil, no worries. Alternative media is alive and well here in Rhode Island. But it seems like, Tony, that there's another part of the local media that continues to suffer. The raging turmoil around Mr. DiPietro's tenure at WPRO continues unabated. And today's Providence Journal, I believe Mr. Fitzpatrick weighed in on the ongoing controversy. I'd just like to point out one thing. Regardless of how you feel about Mr. DiPietro, I am a hardcore First Amendment person. You have the right to listen or not listen. We weighed in a few weeks ago discussing the appropriateness of government using their collective clout to silence someone, regardless of how you feel about that personal opinion. But you should know that ultimately the commercials that Mr. DiPietro participates in are still on the air. So, they're not really... Is he really shut down, Christine?
Well, he's shut down in that he's not getting to say what he wants to say. The commercials are things he's been paid to say. And, it's a voiceover. But I don't know how I would feel if I were an advertiser with a now, hanging in limbo, disgraced radio personality as the voice of my business or organization, but he's not getting an opportunity to express himself, although his personality is still stamped all over it.
Right. Well, what's also curious, too, is PRO's reticence, if you will, to discuss the issue publicly. For an organization that is, one hand, claiming free speech in the First Amendment, they seem curiously inept at providing that same forum for others.
Well, he's been a problematic figure since before he was hired by Pro AM. He got fired from his previous job in Boston for calling a candidate a fat lesbian. Pro AM dived in and hired him.
Right.
They can't really claim they didn't know he was a loose cannon. And repeatedly through the years he's been working there have been issues. So, suddenly there's a petition going on, and all of a sudden they're taking him off the air because of a petition. It's kind of funny to me, anyway. If they're willing to stand behind him when there isn't a petition, they should be willing to either stand behind him when there is one, or explain why they're not.
Or are they just dipping their toes in the financial waters to see, what the long-term effect can they withstand the storm?
I would guess that, actually.
Because I assume he's very successful given the amount of off-show spots that he promotes.
Right.
So I imagine, at least in the business community of Rhode Island, all they're worried about, as they should be, is the do-re-mi.
Yeah.
And we do voiceovers around here all day and all night. You guys have done it with me. It's
right.
It's a 15-minute thing. So if it was really that serious, if the hammer was coming down that hard, it would not be. I'll do them for him, to tell you the truth.
Yeah,
It wouldn't be that difficult
Exactly.
just to run some new spots.
If WPRO wants some new spots, the three of us are available for voiceovers.
Which reminds me is that I could use some help around here. So if John DiPietro gets fired, we could bring him in on the coalition. I have no problem with that.
I have none whatsoever.
He lives near me. We could carpool. We'll pick up Bob Plain on the way, and this show will be off the charts.
That would be great.
Is that the equivalent of the short bus? That's what I want to know.
I will be calling it Tony Jones's Naked Short Bus.
Well, speaking of talk radio, we are truly blessed tonight. There's a little story behind this. You've heard his voice for many years on the local Rhode Island radio talk radio scene as Jeff from Warwick. Jeff and I actually just met about 8 or 9 minutes ago for the first time, despite the fact that arguably he and I have tag team local radio hosts
Heyo.
for a number of years. I lovingly refer to talk radio, conventional talk radio, as short attention span theater. And we often talk here about outrage porn being the dominant effect. In fact, we've actually got an official state legislator, Doreen Costa, who I believe is about to become, under the new administration, secretary of outrage porn.
She's running on the outrage porn platform, actually.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to make an offer out here, a coffee exchange, coffee of your choice. If someone can come up with me with any one legitimate piece of legislation that was advanced in any significant way in the last year of her tenure. Just throwing it out there at the Coffee Exchange on Wickenden Street. So Jeff and I have got a history. Jeff has always focused on libertarian politics and focused extensively on the Fed. He's been published in internet sites across the globe. He lives here in Rhode Island. He's got several prominent Facebook pages that he's been involved in. Rather passionate, rather articulate, which is why in typical talk radio form, he's usually only given about 35 seconds to discuss things. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're going to go old school, a little textbook here. I'm a libertarian. Tony's a devout libertarian. Chris, yeah.
You got hippies.
Jeff.
I'm taking off my shoes as we speak.
Right now, the scent of patchouli waves
So you don't know
across
this, but she actually sits Indian style on the ground while we broadcast.
I'm actually levitating as we speak.
I'm going to try and get that later. But one of the problems the libertarian movement suffers from in this country is the fact that we are constantly defined on our behalf by the mainstream media. Everyone's got an interpretation of what libertarian is. And it became apparent to me that really no one had a clue when the head of the Rhode Island Grand Ole Party, Mr. Smiley, in a minute of bizarre optimism one day, defined himself as a libertarian on Buddy Cianci's show. At which point, I actually drove off. I literally drove off the road. All right. So,
are you okay?
No, I'm still in recovery. Actually, that was worse to me than the image of Tony Jones naked.
You're in psychic traction still from this.
Also sitting Indian style, and levitating.
So Jeff, tell me give me your definition of a libertarian.
Maximum individual liberty. That it doesn't have to be any more complex than that, where it can go off the rails, or for some people I would say go off the rails, but for me I would say you're either a libertarian who believes that government is necessary, because some libertarians believe that government is the only way to secure maximum individual liberty, and then there's the anarchist side that believes that that's not in government's nature to do that. So I tend to differ with a lot of anarchists who believe that you're either an anarchist or a libertarian. I believe libertarian is a philosophy, whereas anarchism is a politics, the way to get to libertarianism. But it's maximum individual liberty. It's no more complex than that.
And yet at the same time, the media will project all sorts of their
fascism and the definitions, and we do tend to allow our political opponents to define us, which is sad, and we fall into the trap. But I think we need to do a better job of defining ourselves, especially free markets. I fall into the trap of using the word capitalism all the time, but I actually despise the word. You should say free markets, because that's what capitalism is. And if you're against free markets, you're really saying you're against freedom.
I think part of the problem also is that the media is taking cues from people who call themselves libertarians because it's currently in vogue.
Yeah,
libertarian. It's considered a happier word now than conservative.
Well, the conservatives have no identity right now, and
right.
Conservatives have dominated the Republican Party, a watered-down version of conservatism. So,
or whatever I myself, who call myself a conservative, believe conservatism is. That's what it is.
Right, and so the GOP sort of has an identity crisis, and libertarianism sounds really popular now, as a lot of people relate that to the Tea Party, which is beyond me.
Right.
So everybody wants to say they're a libertarian-leaning conservative or a libertarian-leaning Republican, which I guess you can be that, but I don't see any, other than maybe Justin Amash and Mike Lee.
Yep.
That's about it. Ted. I mean, some people say Ted Cruz or Rand Paul. I don't think Rand Paul's very. He's getting close to leaning libertarian, but he's not a libertarian to me.
Talk about the debate between Big L and Small L.
That goes back to the debate between people who would call themselves libertarians and people who would call themselves anarchists to me, because you either believe that you can use the political process to achieve maximum individual liberty or you don't. So there's always I try to remind people that you're never going to get along if you're a libertarian who believes in the political process and you're a libertarian who doesn't. You're never going to get along with the other side, so to speak, unless you agree to disagree and move on from that point. Otherwise, you're just going to continue arguing about voting and government and calling each other statists and achieve nothing.
To me, one of the more appalling developments lately has been the whole notion, arises from the media, is like a stench, is sort of the what I'll call the conventional political wisdom. So this year's conventional political wisdom is that libertarian, and we're going to kind of swing off and let's talk about the party politics for a side, that the only true path forward, and I've heard that term used, and if you consider yourself a libertarian, the term path forward has got all sorts of connotations which aren't very libertarian.
Yeah.
All right. So the true path forward is to assume control of the Republican Party. And mixed up in that stew, and you just alluded to it, is the whole notion that libertarians and the Tea Party are one and the same. Now, as a libertarian, the three libertarians in this room, now you talk about horrific reactions.
Kind of makes your skin crawl.
Again, what's worse, Tony Jones and I naked, or the notion of us being Tea Party members? But in your mind, what differentiates between the Tea Party, other than everything?
When it comes down to it, probably foreign policy and the war on drugs, because that's where Tea Parties, people who would call themselves Tea Partiers and libertarians differ the most when it comes down to foreign policy, because the Tea Party really never took too much of a national stand, I guess you could say, on foreign policy. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a big difference. But my whole thing on that is, I've given up my pragmatism of voting. I've just decided I'm not going to vote anymore or support any kind of politician. Unless, of course, Ron Paul decides to run in his 90s. I'll still vote for the guy just because I think he's great. But I don't care what path someone takes to get to the same place I want to go. I may disagree that voting will get us there. But if somebody wants to get to maximum individual liberty, we'll go back to the definition again. If they want to go through the state, that's fine. If they want to go through the GOP, that's fine. At least they'll be influencing people on the way. If they want to go through the Libertarian Party, I still disagree, but they'll still be influencing people on the way. And if they don't want to vote, and if they don't want to be involved in politics at all, if they're talking with people and they're convincing people and they're spreading the ideas, we're all doing the same thing. If you're in a war, you can't just attack the enemy from one angle. You have to have people inside the enemy lines, sabotage. You have to be attacking from the flanks. That's how I see that. Everybody has their own path towards achieving the same goal. And I just don't claim to be all-knowing and say, this is the one way we will get there, and everybody has to follow me.
The Tea Parties, I say newfound. I mean, I went to the very first April 15th Tea Party event here in Rhode Island.
I was there, and that was the only one I went to.
Right. The second or third speaker up was, I think, a well-intentioned Catholic priest who started weighing in right away on social issues. So I can't really say newfound obsession with social politics, because it was pretty much right there from the beginning. But ultimately, the Tea Party defined themselves as small government. All right, and they define themselves as a function of the liberty movement. And then almost immediately, I call them cafeteria conservatives, because they want government involved in what they want to be left alone in. But in terms of some overwhelming social issues, they're very happy to have the government. Is the Tea Party's obsession with gay rights, marriage equality, the war on drugs, does that automatically invalidate them from the libertarian movement?
Yes. Because you can't have social liberty without economic liberty, and vice versa. They're not. You have to have both. And if you believe in one and over the other, you're not a libertarian. You're a conservative. By definition, a conservative to me believes in government, using government for their own moral benefits that they believe in, just not economically as socialists or communists or whatever do. But yeah, I just, the Tea Party. The Tea Party is also very hard to discuss because what is the Tea Party? There are thousands of Tea Parties. So when I see a group stand up and say they're representing the Tea Party on a national level, I do know some Tea Party people who despise other Tea Parties because they are actually pretty libertarian. I mean, they're not numerous, but there are people who do identify with the Tea Party. I know some who are activists in different states and different towns, and they're trying to influence the Tea Party, and they have to a more libertarian-ish road. But for the most part, most Tea Party people I talk with are not libertarian. They believe in a strong military presence overseas. They believe in interventionism. They believe in nation building. They believe in government dictating marriage. They believe in the war on drugs. They believe in most things that I would define as a statist. They would call themselves conservatives. It's just that libertarian is like the cool word to use these days.
Yeah, well, it does sound cool. It's about liberty. Who doesn't like liberty?
Which means
a lot of people.
Which means, P.O., that we were cool before being cool was cool.
Well, we were the liberals. We are more of classical liberals. When you read all old economics books or old history books, when they're talking about liberals, they're talking about what is today libertarians. We had to come up with a new word because our word was stolen from us. So that's what we are today, libertarians. But we are classical liberals.
You may need to find a new word.
Yeah, I'm not even too content with calling myself an anarchist because
that doesn't work either.
It brings up too many negative ideas in people's heads. I guess I'm a freedomtarian. Whatever you want to derive from that, I'm a freedomtarian. I don't believe that government is necessary at all. If that makes me an anarchist, I don't know. But I'll call myself a freedomtarian. That sounds good.
Well, no, look, can we use that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Although I'm not supposed to have to ask you permission, right? We're just supposed to use it.
That's right. Just do it.
I just have IP rights on that. That's all.
Okay. Well, since we're I'm forcing the conversation this way, because I really want to get into some of these labels. You've got anarchist and you've got minarchist. Okay, just break down for the audience the difference between the two, because it isn't until you get really steeped into some of the inner circles, some of the Facebook pages, some of the websites, the online discussion groups, that all of a sudden you see it's kind of like this amoeba where we constantly are breaking down into groups and subgroups, and that's been one of the things that's bedeviled the movement, because none of us can ever. Why liberals, in the New Age sense liberals, are so successful is their slavish adherence to a party line. We seem to be genetically incapable of that. So break down those two groups, if you will, for me.
See, that is a blessing and a curse. It's a curse because it makes it very difficult to achieve any victories in the political sense or the ideological sense. It's a blessing because it keeps us more ideologically pure than the rest of them, because they don't sacrifice their ideas and beliefs for the greater good. We stick to our ideas as best we can and try to get out there and do whatever we can. But a minarchist, who was it, George Washington, who said that government is a necessary evil. That's my definition for it. If you believe that government is a necessary evil, you're a minarchist. If you don't, you're an anarchist.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. Last night, I'm just coincidentally, I'm driving home. I'm listening to one of the mainstream Boston stations, and it was actually Friday night. And they actually had a young man who is at the age of 19, very articulate young man, who was elected to one of the town boards up on the North Shore, and he was actually one of the Paul delegates in Massachusetts that got the shaft from the mainstream Republican Party. My contention will always be that true libertarians are to the Republican Party what African Americans are to the Democratic Party. We are catered to, we are patronized, we are yes to death until the time comes when people actually can assume power. And then, just stick with us. We're the lesser of two evils. So here you had this young man who, articulate beyond his years, actively engaged in the field of battle, screwed over by the GOP, whose contention it is that the only path forward, all right, is for the libertarians to assume control of the Republican Party. And to what I say, and I love that both your reaction to this, why? Because the only thing that we have left is and I hate to use the term ideological purity in this sense, but is our core belief system and our ideological purity. If we believe that, then how can we become party to a group of people who essentially stand against everything we really believe in?
I can see how it is achievable. I can see the goal line that they can see. I mean, you can necessarily run within the GOP, convince GOP voters on your local level, and then gradually move up to a national level, a state level, national level, that libertarian ideas are superior to conservative ideas, and we actually still believe what we believe today as conservatives fail the GOP voters time and time again. I don't think it's likely, just because there's just, as you said, we are basically told, vote this way. Next election, we'll get somebody in there who we can all agree with. That time never comes. But don't you think that a libertarian running in the GOP, and if they do have elections and win, it dilutes the conservative base and does grow the libertarian? So, in other words,
I would agree.
While you're running against your opponent, you're also running within your opponent's, in other words, behind enemy lines. You're weakening your opponent. At the same time, Libertarian Party candidates can still run, and Libertarians can run as independents. You're attacking them from multiple angles rather than just picking, well, let's just take over the GOP. Let's just run for the Libertarian Party. Let's just run as independents. Why not do all three? And like I said, I disagree with this. I don't think we can achieve what we want through government, or at least this government.
Well, but how do you expect to achieve what you want with the government that we currently have in the way? I mean, it seems to me that in order to have less government, you need to get people, you need a critical mass of elected officials who agree that the government needs to be smaller, and smaller across the board, not just unless one of their pet peeves or sacred cows, if you will, is there to be gored.
I think you need a critical mass of pissed off voters.
Yeah, but those pissed off voters need someone that they can vote for.
Not necessarily. I think, if no one rules, if no one obeys.
No, but they still need to vote for either for somebody or against somebody. But eventually, someone will be installed in office. And if you want that person to be the person who favors less government, or who's someone ideally who's actively looking for ways to shrink the government, those candidates need to run, and they need to get their message out there. And there needs to be critical mass, in my opinion, of candidates, all the way from city council and dog catcher up, to build your to have
a farm team.
Yeah, to have a farm team, but also to have the dialogue out there.
Yeah,
unless you have lots of people talking about what it means to be a libertarian, and by which I mean a real libertarian, not the Ted Cruzes who want to wrap themselves in the libertarian mantle because it sounds cool at the moment. It needs to be out there, and you need to get candidates into office, even if they're offices that you don't think should exist, because you're not going to get rid of them unless you're in a position of power to do it.
Right, but that would what I was telling a friend of mine the other day was that we need a pun intended, a campaign for liberty, but not what the Campaign for Liberty does. A campaign for liberty, and this will never happen, in my opinion, and this is what needs to be done, because libertarians have jobs. We have families. We don't have time to do these things, and we don't have billionaire donors to pay us to do it.
Right, because the billionaire donors are they like the system just fine the way it is.
Or they want to create their own image, the corporatists.
Yeah, right. Exactly. They want
the Koch brothers. If they're behind you, is because they have an agenda.
Right.
But we need a campaign to elect liberty, not to elect a politician. In other words, people running a campaign, going door to door, putting out pamphlets, running ads, not to elect a politician, just to spread the ideas of libertarianism. I don't understand why we need to get behind a politician to push these ideas out there.
Well,
we should be able to do it without a politician.
I don't mean in the cult of personality sense. I mean that you need people sitting in the Senate to put out bills there saying, let's shrink this government.
But I don't.
Otherwise, it's not going to happen. I mean, unless you're talking about a nationwide referendum, which is very difficult to pull across.
Right, and it's I know I'm in a losing battle, but when is the last time government has shrunk?
I don't know the answer to that, but it's not going to happen if all the libertarians stay home and let the corporatists keep getting their candidates in office.
If I've been voting and it's still happening, so I mean,
I've been voting. I voted.
But have there been enough people for you to vote for? Well, I'm not convinced there have been.
Americans had actually a very clear choice in this last election, national election.
Two clear choices.
Yeah, I mean, I voted for Gary Johnson. And there was a little bit of a cult of personality at work there because I believe in the man. To me, he should have been, and this is what infuriates me about the Republican Party, he should have been the ideal candidate for president in the last runaround, as opposed to Mitt Romney. Here you had a two-term governor from a dying, literally one of the poorest states in the nation, New Mexico. The state was literally dying. In the space of 8 years, they called him Governor Veto, turned around the state, left the state with a surplus, employment rose, and just the overall quality of life was better. And he repealed and vetoed, I think it was close to, 1,000 different bills. And here's a man who was self-made. He idealized what around the turn of the century would have been the American hero. Mm-hmm. And for all the Republicans who said, well, just from a small state, dismissed him, poo-pooed him, I will have you remember that the only true Democratic lion left is a guy named Bill Clinton, who came from a small, poor state down south, who managed to turn that into a two-term presidency, and has got the only, and it's completely manufactured, but the only real legacy left in any sort of national politician.
Yeah, but Gary Johnson didn't fix up the Olympics, P.O.
Yeah, there you go.
He also didn't spend as much time, or probably any time during the debates, bashing Obama directly. That wasn't, he wasn't providing red meat for the circus. He wasn't harping on social issues. He wasn't raising his hand for whatever the nut job.
But he was also precluded from participating in a number of the because ultimately the media right now, the mainstream media, decides who gets to play ball.
Was he kept out of the primary debates?
He was kept out of a number of the. He was deemed. There in the early stages.
I have to say, there were billions of primary debates, and I just couldn't stomach them.
He wasn't two of them, but there were about 9 of them.
Yeah, 2 isn't enough.
Right. Yeah. He was deemed. In essentially insignificant by those who deem these things,
which is hilarious considering how many politicians are tripping over themselves to call themselves libertarians. And conservatives and Republicans simultaneously, they had someone who actually fit that bill, and they wouldn't let them participate.
I had heard in an interview, it was insulting to me, and I wasn't a huge Johnson fan. I don't really have too much against him, but it was insulting to me because they were talking to him about not being let in the debates, and he was complaining about it, and he said, whoever was the interviewer, I think it was on Fox News, they said, well, why would you be allowed in the debates? They do have a libertarian choice up there, Ron Paul. So why do they need to hear from you?
So they only need one libertarian token candidate? Is that the idea?
The one jokester up there for everybody, for them to try to catch in a stupid question and laugh at.
Exactly. And the debates were mostly, everybody elbowing each other out of the way to prove that they could rally the worst
I'm the
instincts.
most Reaganite.
Yeah, exactly. The worst instincts of the base. I would bury Reagan under a pile of my superior conservatism.
Hopefully in 2016 we'll have Dennis Kucinich to torture instead. Hey, we're a little over halfway through the show, which means we need to take a quick break. You are tuned in to the Coalition online, coalitionradio.us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Coalition, on Twitter @Coalition Radio. We'll have more with in-studio guest Jeff Scott after the break.
Heading out on the town tonight? Be sure to log on to providencenightout.com and don't forget to check their cell phone app. That's providencenightout.com.
Hello, my name is Jim Gray, and I am a judge of the Superior Court in California and a former federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. I would like to talk to you for a moment about marijuana. Did you know that since the federal government first banned marijuana in 1937, usage in this country has actually gone up by about 4,000%? Or did you know that in the Netherlands, where adults are allowed to possess small amounts of marijuana and buy it from government-regulated businesses, fewer adults and fewer teenagers smoke marijuana than here in our country? Or that an American is arrested on marijuana charges every 38 seconds? If you are wondering if any of this makes sense, you are not alone. To find out more, contact the Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or visit them on the web at mpp.org. Thank you, and good luck to us all.
Hey everybody, it's Tony Jones. You know, when I'm not here yakking about politics, I spin records. That's right, if you like good old-fashioned rock and roll radio the way God intended it to be, then tune in to The Tony Jones Show. The information's online at tonyjones.org. That's tonyjones.org.
I found a picture of you.
13 Folds is your definitive source for cannabis culture, with a print magazine, radio show, live events, and so much more. Check them out online at 13folds.com. That's the number 13, FOLDS.com.
Tony Jones here. You are tuned in to the Coalition online at coalitionradio.us. Christina's here. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, Tony.
The PO taxpayer in the house. PO, good evening.
Tony.
In the house.
In the house, as the kids say.
Or as the kids said 15 years ago.
You know I am the voice of a new generation.
I am the voice of the Pepsi generation. Hey, Tony, how can people contact us online with questions?
Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. Of course, on Twitter at Coalition_radio. We had some actual great making sense questions last week with Mr. Mann here, and but then we just get some crazy stuff, and it's not even worth repeating. So if you're our Twitter follower, you know who you are, and I just scolded you.
How is that Twitter stock doing for you this week, Tony?
I think it's doing well, actually.
Yeah, you may want to check that, but don't do that till after the show.
Is it paying you dividends in bitcoins?
we need an engineer. I just want to bring it to sort of a conclusion what we were talking about in the last segment. The litany of losers that the alleged conservative wing of the Republican Party has provided us over the last 40 years. I mean, remember, this is the party of Bob Dole, the party of John McCain. I mean, men with no principle, men who are by very definition. I mean, I believe Bob Dole's middle name was Archer Daniels Midland. All right. Men who have no soul. Mitt Romney. These are the people that would come to us and say, these are the lions that are going to lead us to the path of truth and righteousness. That's why I can never take a Republican seriously again. On a local level, you know, the party of Ed DePreet, the party of Don Carcieri, on and on again, subsuming the people's will for the benefit of the few. And so when you have a protracted history like that, why keep, I'll spare you the usual cliches, but we know them all, but why keep going to that well? So, to me, the benefit of a Gary Johnson presidency, you talked about raising the issues. One of his mantras was politically conservative, socially cool. And to me, the success of that campaign was not just breaching the magic 1% mark, not making a real difference in electoral politics in certain states, but bringing an entire generation of young people into the notion that self-reliance and self-liberty was something to be. This is a group of people who, to the left and right of me, are people who were brought up in an educational system that taught that dependency is something to be worked towards. And this, to me, was the breath of fresh air. So that to me, why national electoral politics, in one sense, still matter, and why I wanted to vote for someone that I felt, as hopeless as his campaign may have seen on a national level, the value he brought. That's what I see, anyway.
And you notice the only two candidates who had a youth appeal they shunned. The GOP absolutely did not want anything to do with, and that was Johnson and Paul. The GOP could have capitalized, even if Paul and Johnson lost the election, by nominating either of them. They could have capitalized for future generations on a ton of youth voters who they just totally disenfranchised, from not letting them in the debates, from the election rigging that went on during the primaries in Maine and New Hampshire and in Utah, in Vegas. Who are the name of those two? One of the billionaires over there rigged one of the elections. It was just on and on and on and on. Now they don't want anything to do with them. Now it's kind of a broken movement. A lot of libertarians like to talk about the liberty movement. I don't even know what that means. I don't even know if I'm a part of it. I don't want to be, because it's...
Well, you don't like the idea of movements in some sense.
I like the idea of movements.
But not politically...
Not anymore. Within the past year, I just become so apathetic to government, the political process. I just don't see... the last time government was cut was Calvin Coolidge. Mm-hmm. That was a long time ago.
Well, every ultimately party jumps in and boosts its own side, and we just end up with a giant bloated government.
Well, in one sense, euphemisms have no soul. I mean, hope and change is the Democratic equivalent of the liberty movement. I mean, it means to you what you think it means.
Yeah.
You carry that torch forward in a room full of people who have completely different views, most of whom are, what's the cliche from Fox News? Low information voters. I mean, that's true on both sides of the aisle.
But do you think that people actually want change, though? I especially take for Rhode Island, for example. People talk about change, and the people who talk about changing the system, they usually win. They get a lot of popularity, but nothing ever changes. I think what Rhode Islanders want, and maybe what a lot of voters out there across the country want, they don't necessarily want change. They just want big government to work. And whoever says they're going to make it work will win. It's not that they want the system to change. They want it to change in a sense of, it's going to work now. We're going to make it work. We have the plan to make it work. They don't want the system dismantled. They want new management. Well, that's why the new managers always win.
Well, they want change in a specific segment of activity that they're unhappy with right now. They don't want global change. They want here's my pet peeve. I want this particular thing changed, but I don't want that other stuff changed. So everyone hears change, as P.O. just pointed out, and it means to them what they want it to mean.
But none of it is change. There's only two solutions. The third option of no government involvement is not the change option anymore. In other words, Look at the Republican platform. Getting rid of the Department of Education is no longer in there. Mm-hmm. We have our management plan. The Democrats have their management plan. So you have no option of no management plan. Dismantle the Department of Education.
Which is why you have the spectacle of a guy named John Boehner taking on the vestiges of what's left of the liberty movement, when in fact one can argue that whatever success the Republican Party has had has been a direct result of the Tea Party people. Ultimately, you're asking people to take the blue pill.
Right.
Right. Take the pill and wake up.
It's that type of courage. Is that possible?
Well, that's what
a self-absorbed cocoon-like environment we have now.
That's what I mean. It takes a grassroots election type process of going door to door, handing out talking to people, not on Facebook. Mostly on Facebook and social media, you're just talking to other libertarians, or even if you're not talking to a libertarian, maybe you convert a conservative over to libertarianism. That's great, but you need to go where David Cicilline goes. You need to go to the tenement buildings and the old folks' homes, and you need to go to where most Americans are. Talk to them not about a candidate, but about liberty and the libertarian philosophy and how and all of that. We don't need a politician to do that, is my opinion.
Well, one of the purposes of this show is to bring people of radically different persuasions under one tent. We did get Greg Garrett to admit in a moment of astonishing clarity on my behalf, which doesn't happen very often, the notion that the marketplace ultimately is the great resource for solving a lot of our environmental problems. So it's our conviction, and I think you brought it up from the libertarian side, that people who are iconoclastic enough to be either truly libertarian or truly green have a number of the same desired outcomes. It's just a question of working out how we get there. So this show will always bring people of both sides in to try and figure out the real answer, as opposed to the people, the apparatchiks of Rhode Island, who merely are interested in maintaining the bureaucracy and the machine for their own personal benefit. I guess the time keeps marching by, so there's one issue we have to get to. If I had you on the radio for an hour and didn't discuss the Federal Reserve, I think there would be torches burning outside my car when I got out of here.
Like usual.
Yeah, listen, Tony, next week, by the way, is wear your own Kevlar to work day. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Let's talk about the Fed. You mentioned the Federal Reserve to the average ham and egger, and you can actually see his eyes glaze over, because they really, and it's really a function of education, it's not the issue. They really don't understand how the Fed works, the dangers it presents to our society, the extra government control. I don't want to take away your thunder. Why is the Fed critical